Where do we recommend Philippine startups incorporate? Up to you. Investors prefer Singapore, but we have invested in Philippines. But you will at some point need to reincorporate in Singapore for later stage VC funding. Do we fund social enterprises? Yes, if they use technology to scale. Do we use other criteria when we evaluate social enterprises? No, it's the same ones, but you probably get more of a pass in that if you do have a triple bottom line, there are investors will seek less of a return, say at the end of the day they'll look for various things. Would you recommend cold emails to meet potential investors? Yes. I was sitting on a panel, some investors probably don't like it, but I was sitting on a panel with the founder from VC at Tectonic on the weekend, and he cold emailed the CEO of Salesforce off an email off the back of a book. He cold called Larry at google.com. So these emails are out there. If you do it at the right time of day, he said, with the right words, they respond, and they did, and he got funding from it. Do you look at how the team do their personal finance management? I'll pass that one out. Does anyone want to have a crack?
Me personally, yes. If, especially again, one thing I really look at is the background of the person who will be handling the money, whether it's the CEO, CFO, whoever it is, who calls the shots regarding the money. If they don't have professional training in it, nor professional experience, and it comes out during due diligence that they can't even handle their own personal money, where am I going to get the confidence that they will know how to handle my money? I mean, yes, you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't know how to handle the money you're asking of me, and what will I look at? How you handle what money you have now. I mean, how do you spend? How do you present? Of course it matters. Because again, you're asking for money. So you have to show that you know what to do with it.
All right, one more. A lot of you probably are wondering this, but before traction, before we will fund you, what do you do? Where can you find money, help advisors?
The 3 F's. Friends, family, and fools. And mostly the fools part. But basically, if you have a good idea, you go to your vendors, you look for some allowances, some credit lines. You do everything that you can to get your business going. That's the passion. And a lot of it is non-cash. If you can build traction without cash, that shows a lot for the investor. That how much did you invest in this and you got here? That gives a lot of confidence to investors. So where can you get the money? Wherever you can. A lot of it is not cash. A lot of it is breaks from your vendors, from your suppliers. Someone lending their logo to your business that makes you look bigger and then gives credibility to other clients. Before you get the traction, before you get institutional funding, do everything that you can to build your momentum.
And I guess the last stage of that question, are you alone? Well, if you feel that way, then I think something is wrong because like we've said, you need a team. And that's the first thing you should look for before money. Find a team because just on the day, let's say you want to pitch for the biggest opportunity and you happen to get sick. Is there anyone who can step in for you and your company? I mean, these opportunities, they won't, like, for example, okay, we give you the chance to pitch to us. If it just so happens on that day, something happens, you're sick, you're physically incapable of showing up, we're not going to move our meeting for you. Okay. So someone has to be there. And that someone has to know the business as well as you. He has to be able to pitch with the same passion as you. So that's the first thing really should look for before money. And if you still feel alone, then you still need to find that other partner or that team within which you will build this company, because none of the companies we've seen that succeeded really were just solo acts from the get-go. Started one person idea, yes. First thing he did, find someone to work with. Then the money can come later.
So yes, your hustle builds muscle, but the other part to your question is, besides friends, family, and fools, there is another F, which is funds and grants. So there might be some funds or grants that you might be qualified for. Hopefully, the Philippine Startup Act, there'll be more IRRs that will make that happen. But there are existing grants from UST, I think, that you can apply for. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you don't have the passion to try and find a way to scrounge up that first couple of $1,000 that it takes to get your idea off the ground, why should we invest our couple of $1,000s?
Just my 2 cents. You will need some cash to start your business, right? But a lot of the time, I encounter teams and founders that vastly overestimate the amount of cash they need, right? They'll be like, I need 5 million pesos to build a website, build an app, to deliver my service or my product or whatever it is, right, to my customer. And over and over again, we'll give them the advice that you don't need a website, you don't need an app, you just need to do it. You just need to put yourself in front of the customer, tell them you'll do it, and you actually physically do it to test whether they will pay for what you're doing. And that's the best way to start, because what you don't want to happen is to take 5 million pesos from any of us, build a website, put yourself in front of a customer, and suddenly they say, I don't need that, right? So, yeah, funding, you will need it, but you probably don't need as much as you think to start off with. On mentors, well, we had a talk like a few years ago, and basically I just said, you have to ask. A lot of the time, people just aren't asking, hey, can you mentor me? You seem to know what you're doing. You just have to ask. So send an email, set a call, set a meeting. Ask people if you want mentorship. Hopefully, you're asking people that are competent, that know what they're doing, and know their fields, and those are the people you're asking.
Hold on to that, Lyle, because what you just mentioned, one of the other questions is about how do you validate your idea, and you've just touched on that. So, how do they know that this is a great idea? This is something that I should commit to as a founder. That this is going to be something that will scale and be a big market.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, but for those of you that aren't, there's a great book called The Lean Startup. You can check out a copy. If it's the first time you're hearing it, it's a really great place to start for learning what are some approaches to validating ideas, doing kinds of pilots to test whether somebody will actually buy into your service or product or whatever it is that you're trying to offer. And yeah, the basic idea here is don't wait for all of these things, all of these conditions to be perfect. Funding, product development, team. If there's any way you can find to test your idea with a customer at the earliest possible time, that's what you want to be doing.
Cubo does these great boot camps, and I saw the end of one, but over the course of 3 days, they took people who had simply an idea, and they were in the market within 2 days, and actually had, the tech is incredibly basic, but they're validating from day 2, trying to get people through, feedback mechanisms to sort of gauge, is this worth my time?
And I guess just as a friendly word of caution, when you engage someone as a mentor and they begin asking for equity for mentorship, just make sure you understand what you're giving up. Make sure you know the value of what it is you're giving up. And it may seem small now in the beginning, but if your idea succeeds, then that becomes a lot. And yes, your mentor will help you succeed. And that's the second part of that. Make sure that there is a firm commitment on both sides. You are committing equity. They should commit time. Because they are getting something of value, so should you. So again, be careful, because I've seen a number of arrangements where you'll get advisory shares or whatever we want to call them. And is there reciprocal value going back? When are you going to meet? Is there a regular schedule for meeting? Or is it just convenience? Is there actually a strategy that will be discussed, or is it just whatever pops to mind on that day? So again, for startups, you have to be just on mentoring. It's very important, but make sure that you understand again the value of what you are trading.
Yeah. So I can't stress this enough. So when you do, say you do your seed round and your pre-money is $2 million, that's 5% of that is $100,000. Has a few meetings and the odd chat been worth that? If you do give out advisory shares and equity, make sure it vests, make sure they earn it, make sure they bring in some funding, make sure they bring in some clients. Unless they meet that, they do not get the shares. Right. The other, probably related to this, is when do you know, when should you discontinue? When do you know that, time has had its day? And an observation here would be that, in the Philippines, failure can take quite some time. So people will persevere for 5 years. But, I've read these articles and places where people say that, if you break your life down into segments, you've probably got 5 chances to find an idea that works. So fail quickly is the message.
Well, there are different answers to this, I guess. If you go by what the Lean Startup kind of says for early ideas, if you want a more black and white approach, then you can set a ratio, let's say, right? If you try to sell your product to, let's say, 50 random strangers, and let's say you just decided 25 people buying or pre-ordering your product is a success, and anything less than that is a failure, maybe that's already one way to set success-fail criteria, right? So that you can move on to your next idea more quickly. Now, it's a bit more complicated the longer you're in it, right? And I guess the other answer to the question is it's probably when you or the people around you think you've given it enough tries.
My answer is a little bit different, but that's because I'm the consulting advisory side. So looking at it analytically, one aspect would really be, does the opportunity still exist? Is it still an opportunity-rich environment that you've just missed? Because the tragedy would be you give up when you're 3 feet from striking gold or hitting oil, right? So is the opportunities worthwhile? Then the question becomes, do you have access to the resources you need to get there? And if it's just a little bit more sweat and you're not ready to give up yet, then I say go for it. But if at some point you're harming yourself and others, then maybe that is something you need to take a step back on, because it is easy to get trapped by the fallacy of sunk cost.
Don't be afraid of failure. A lot of Silicon Valley investors prefer to invest in founders who have failed, because they know how hard it is to raise money, they know how hard it is to build a company, they know the pain of failure, and that they will work that much harder to succeed. As an anecdote, the chairman of Daewoo Corporation in Korea, bankrupted 5 times, and he built the 2nd largest company in Korea. So you can fail, but the question was, when do I call it quits? When do I know I failed? You know that better than anyone else. Maybe people might tell you, you should stop. That's a very personal question, because you put your heart and guts and blood into it, and if you're finding you're having trouble feeding your family, you should seriously think about what you're doing.
And on my end, the answer would simply be because the numbers will tell you to. If even your best projections will not even, in a sense, recover or approximate what you are still expected to spend, never mind what you've already spent, what you're still expected to spend moving forward, then no matter how good that is, again, the person who gave you the money expects it to come back quite substantially. So if even your best projections say, you know what, we will make 10 million, but to get the 10 million, I need to spend 50 million. Then I think maybe you should quit at that point.
All right. So there's an awful lot of questions here about litigation. There's quite a few about WeWork, but probably one last meaty one would be valuation. How do you value a startup?
So I don't have a traditional investment background. So this is the unsanctioned, not in any book, Jopseph de Leon method evaluation. I ask you how much you think you're worth, and then I ask you how much your unit economics are, and then I break that down. And then I ask you where you're at right now in terms of your business, and then I ask you how much money you're asking for. And basically, if that amount you're asking for will be reasonable enough to get to the number where your unit economics will match that number you're asking for, like let's say X number of customers per year, then I'll be comfortable. Like, yes, you'll have enough traction. This business will go far enough to justify potentially this kind of valuation.
So rather than say how we value or how I value a company, I would rather say like how you shouldn't value a company. And the way you shouldn't do it is to come up with an arbitrary number that you pulled out of thin air and then say that's the value of your company. However you value your company, what's important is that you have a way to arrive at that number, right? Whether it's because of your future earnings, because of the growth potential, because some other company very similar to you was invested for a very similar amount. Those are good reasons to that back evaluation compared to coming up with a number that you don't understand, that you can't explain to a potential investor. So my advice would be study your business, study the space you're in, study what investors are doing with companies in a similar stage or that are similar to you. Come up with a reason why the number that you're saying is the number. It could be, because that's the amount of money we need for the next 6 months. That's a good reason, right? So have a good reason behind the valuation that you're coming up with.
As a former investment banker, I'm a numbers guy. So there are 3 financial valuation methodologies to value a company, a private company. First is discounted cash flow analysis. So that assumes that the startup company has a working financial model that will produce a projection of the discounted cash flows of the company going forward, typically 5 years, etc. And then you discount that back to present value, and you come up with a number. And then you got to argue over the discount rate. It's a very straightforward science in terms of spreadsheet financial analysis. The second methodology is to do M&A valuation. So what other companies in your space that are similar, that have been acquired recently, what's the value? And then you take a metric, so number of eyeballs or number of customers or revenue ratios, etc. And then you apply that to where you are, and then that's a M&A comparable. The third is a public company analysis comparable. So you're in a similar space as a US publicly traded company or a Singapore publicly traded company, and their price earnings ratio is X, or their revenue ratio is X, and then you compare that to what you've done so far. But a lot of you are not even pre-revenue, and so a lot of these analyses don't apply. So what do you do in those situations? As just that's a little bit rough, but you look at how much money you need to raise to the next milestone, and you should never give up too much of the company. I can give you a horror story of a fairly well-known Philippine startup company, which I cannot disclose their name because they're a client of mine, but they gave up 60% of their company. They are uninvestable. No investor will put in money knowing that the bulk of the money is owned by someone else, and the money is not going to be utilized efficiently because there's not enough equity for the management to put their blood, sweat, and tears into the company. So, James emphasized earlier is you should not give up too much of your company. And at an early stage where there's very difficult to come up with financial metrics because there's no financial metrics available, one way to start is I need X amount of money to get me to the point where I know I have a good case and I'm very investable, and I'm willing to give up 20% of my company to get me there. That's a little bit of backward problem solving.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it at this early stage, it does come down to backward problem solving. But one of the mistakes that we do see is that someone will come to us with a valuation of what they would be in 5 years if the unknown happened. So we're not investing at a valuation of what you could be in 5 years. We're investing at what you are today. That's probably a key point.
And just to add, that's the thing, that question, if you don't know what your company is worth, you have a problem. Because, especially at an early stage, if you can't answer that question, then find someone and add them to your team who can answer that question for you. Because everyone else you face moving forward will have their own valuation of your company using whatever method. And they will, of course, want, in more cases than not, want that value to be lower. Of course, I mean, if I'm going to invest in something, I want to get the most for the cheapest. You better have someone in your team that speaks that language. That's what we're saying. You have to have that covered. Because otherwise, once you're in front of a team of people who do this professionally for a living, remember, they want to get the most for the least in many cases. Do you have anyone in your team who can stand up to them? Because once you get desperate and money's not coming in, I mean, you'll be forced to maybe take whatever offers there just to keep the lights on. You should know to raise money way before that. And again, that speaks to building your team with the proper skill set. So if raising funds and expanding is part really of your plan, from the beginning, have someone who can do that in your team. Otherwise, if you try to find it on the run, they're not going to be as invested as you. And you're going to find it very difficult to give a good valuation because, as has been stated, there is no one valuation. So if some guy tries to lowball your company, what can you say? And he'll say, oh, based on this, you're only worth this, give me this much of your company. What do you say? Okay, so that's it. Just say no.
Alright. Sorry, what time are we finishing tonight?
We still have an hour.
Oh, there you go. We might need a drink.
Sorry, can we get a bite? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have a break. So what we might do, unless I'll answer one more question, and because it's been a common one. How do people contact us? I mean, or how do we find startups? But basically, we have a lot of members, and you may not know you're talking to a member, but our members and we go to all the events. We talk to Cubo, Launch Garage, all the various the idea spaces, all of the people in the ecosystem, and we will find out about you. You'll be recommended to us when people think that you're ready. We go to the pitch competitions, the hackathons. When you are ready, we can approach you, which we do, or just cold email us. We're always willing to have a look at a deck and give you some feedback as to where we think you are. Give you some quick feedback on that deck, and typically it will be, one of the comments that we could have a generalization about a lot of pitches that I do see is that they're, you're really across your mission and your vision and what you're going to do, but where it's weaker is actually on your business model. How are you going to make money out of this? How are you going to scale it? And it needs to be more than, I'm going to use Facebook and Google ads. It's, what's your strategy? How have you segmented your market? Showing that you really understand your business and how you're going to grow it. When you're at that point, you're probably ready to talk to us.
So that's a specific answer for Maine, right? And it's true for in general as well. But one more key thing I think is good. If you're looking for investors in general, try to approach funded startups. They can refer you to the people that invested in them, and they're friendly to you. They can understand where you are. They can give you advice on where you're lacking because they've been where you are, right? So, reach out to other startups that have been funded. That's a good way also to reach out to investors in general.
The first investment I actually wanted to make, the guy said no. Because he was actually very focused on trying to win over a particular strategic investor, which was great. That's why I like this startup. Because he knew that for his business to grow, he needed this kind of individual, someone who was at a high position with access to regional markets, to the China market, and mechanical equipment and importation licenses. I didn't have any of those things. So he actually identified 2 or 3 people that he really wanted to get to know and win over as a strategic investor. It took him about a year, and he got very successful because he didn't take my money, he took someone else's smarter money than mine. So it doesn't always have to come from a cold email. You can also think about what do you really need to grow your business, who are the people that might be able to help you get there, and then if you have a compelling business case and a little bit of luck and the right set of stepping stones, you actually might get it. But as James said, the easier to do is to become, before you approach them, establish escalating levels of credibility. If you go there and you have a piece of paper and a big smile, you better be super good looking, But if you go there with a business that's already started, you've gone through a few sessions with, say, a hackathon first, and then you go compete at SeedStars or some other competition, so that you are able to come to them with proof that other smart people just like you have looked at our business and they think we're worth something. Then it becomes a much easier conversation. So that's one option or approach.
Do we invest in an incubator? Would anyone here invest in an incubator? I assume the answer would be no. The answer would be no, because it would come down to what's the exit strategy. How do you get your money out of an incubator? Would be very difficult. Quickly.
So I guess this was asked by somebody from a state university. Just to give you some feedback, I guess. We have an incubator. We've worked with state-based universities before. So if you're looking for somebody to at least learn from or compare notes with, you can reach out to us at BrainSparks, community@brainsparks.ph. Feel free to drop us a line.
So while we won't invest money, we will invest our time to work with incubators if you want our help. If you're even better, if you're an incubator and you're able to organize your own mini pitch competition, would love to go.
And we do go. All right, this litigation one keeps appearing, so we'll address it, but would we invest in a startup whose founders are engaged in litigation with each other over ownership control? That's one. Would you invest in one that's in litigation in any way? I think it's pretty easy to answer, but
Hell the heck no.
It depends. If we're talking about founders of $1 billion company, maybe, right? Because it's already valued. But if you're just starting out and there are criminal cases already getting filed, forget about it.
and on that, in terms of litigation generally, if as in angel investors, it's at the point that litigation is involved with someone we're invested in, it's pointless. It's all over. So we may as well just go home, unless there's been some fraudulent activity, and then we would exercise our legal rights.
Just to add to that, there are hundreds of startups out there, and if you're saying they're all about the same, and this one has a lawsuit, would you invest in that one? Just ask yourself the question. If you had 10 startups in front of you, they're all about the same, they all look good, and they all have good prospects, but this one has a lawsuit, would you put your money in that one? I don't think so. So just think about it yourself. So if you have any legal issues, clean it up before you approach investors. If you have legal issues, and it's untractable, then maybe you close down the company and you set up a new one.
All right, what's the biggest strategy or operations effort we saw in a startup without naming names?
Biggest operation effort.
Yeah, biggest screw up operational or strategy wise in a startup that we've seen. Something that stopped us investing, the only one that comes to mind are integrity issues or coachability. If we don't think that a founder is someone that, because angel investors, we mentor and coach and help the individual grow. And if they're not receptive, if they, if any questioning of their thoughts or their, what's going on leads to them getting angry, and they're not coachable. So it's probably a red flag for us. But
I have a real life example. I won't name the company, but they were trying to do energy arbitrage. So they were trying to aggregate energy production from small people and then try to sell it to the grid. Well, I'm an expert on renewable energy, and you can't do that legally, because you have to apply with the WESM, the wholesale electric spot market. You have to get all sorts of approvals from the Department of Energy, from Transco. The energy business is very complex, and to say that a bunch of people can do tie together some solar cells and then sell to the grid, that's a infeasible project, and they were trying to raise money. They actually won awards with a non-legally feasible business plan.
So I've got one, and actually this is one where Vic saved my butt. So there was a startup that I was very encouraged to invest in. I won't name names. Where the idea, while crazy, made a lot of sense to me based on my market experience. But it involved importing technology from outside the country, like England, and applying it in the Philippine context. And Victor here was very practical and said, would this equipment that works in a nice clean environment outside operate well in the tropics, the heat, and the crap conditions of the Philippines? And after thinking about it, and then realizing that the startup was presenting this idea as if they were actually running it already. And since I was a newbie at the time, I fell for it. So thank God for me, because I didn't put my money in, and they're gone now.
This is our famous chicken shit story. Literally, they were, excuse my French, but basically they were taking chicken feces and trying to turn it into fertilizer. So that's why I call it our chicken shit story.
Which is a good business, just so
It's a good business,
It's a good
but
business.
the premise was
their operational execution was bullshit. That was off my head. Okay, James, 2 more.
no,
Or the floor.
where the floor be.
We can go home. So,
Maybe we'll take 2 from the floor. If there's any of all that I think we've gone through most of them, except for we haven't talked about WeWork. But if anyone wants to raise a question we haven't covered, please raise your hand right now.
and I can talk about it. Really want to.
If not,
Hi, good evening. So, as an early startup, how do you make decisions, or what parameters do you have to consider when you're picking founders or your core team versus just, maybe we don't need someone like that, let's just hire them, or we'll just outsource them?
So I have an operational theory around that. I shared this with someone earlier, and I'll share it with anyone that asks. But I had the opportunity to work with some of the best angel investors in the region, and I asked them what their favorite investment questions are, and I put that together in a presentation that you guys can have if you want to. We'll type it up and share it later. But one of the theories that I operate on is that in any transaction, you have to have 4 types of people to complete a transaction cycle. Another way to look at it is when you're building your team out, you want to find people that complement your skill set to get the job done, right? And so in terms of that, it's a balance of finding people that have the complementary skills but have an equivalent level of commitment. Right? Does that answer your question fairly?
Yes.
Yeah. And later on, if you want to know what that, after the presentation, it's www.tinyurl.com/seedstars8slides. And maybe I'll type it up later so you can see it, because that might be longer than I wanted it to be.
Yeah, just to also give my 2 cents. We've answered this for some other founders before. Between co-founders and employees, I think some of the things you want to consider, the main thing is, are they going to contribute to your vision? Are they going to help you build your way toward that vision that you see for your company or for the thing that you're trying to achieve, the problem that you're trying to solve? Or are they an employee? They're still important, but they might not be monumental to you building out that vision, right? And I guess between employee and outsource, similar thing, more a qualitative answer, like how much care is required to the kind of work that you want to get done, right? Because if you're outsourcing it, then it's not a lot of care or thought that's going to go into whatever you're outsourcing it. If it's a lot of care that you need, then it's somebody within your organization that understands your culture, that understands what's vital to you, will probably be able to do the job better.
I have a more simple way to look at who's a founder, who's an employee, and whether to outsource or not. Is who's putting in the money? That's the founder. And if they don't put in the money, but they're willing to take a pay cut, say they're making 100,000 in their job, they're willing to join your startup and take only 50,000. They're also putting sweat equity, so they're also considered a founder. And then employees are employees, you pay them. But over time, if they're valuable, you may want to grant them stock options. And I highly recommend you to vest them over time instead of just giving them outright stock grants, because people leave. Things change, and you don't want people to hold on to your equity. They're no longer in the company. That's dead equity. That's not a good thing. And then in terms of outsourcing, outsource things that are non-mission critical, like you need a web page, and if your web page is not the most critical part of your business, you outsource that. You don't need to hire a web designer inside your team if that's not a critical part of your business. But if the database functionality, you better have a DBA in your company. You don't outsource a critical function for your critical business needs. Maybe if you can't hire enough quality people and you need a certain aspect, you need more devs, you might want to talk about looking into an outsource team to handle a portion of it. But for mission critical aspects, you should not outsource that. That should be internal, and that's part of your competitive advantage that investors will want to look at.
All right, we're going to leave some time at the end just to network and circulate. But one more question before we go, if anyone has one. If not, we'll call it a night.
So a really quick one. I'm a journalist with the Philippine Star Network.
What's your name, buddy?
Tiago. So I handle Business World and SparkUp, which is specifically for startups. And so over the course of covering the startup community, the innovation community, you see that the private sector, you guys, part of the private sector, very active. The startups are there, the public sector, and clearly we are in Cuba, so the public sector is playing a big role. So comparing the Philippines to other communities, startup communities, regionally, globally, what is missing? Who are the actors that are, I'm going to say, underperforming, or which actors can play a bigger role in helping mature the local community? I'll leave it to you guys to kind of on that.
Can I take the first
Yeah,
part?
go for it.
We're fortunate we have Manila Angels, and we're one of the most active investors in our space. But there are not enough early stage seed investors. That's a big problem. When you run out of friends, family, and fools, you need to go to the next level of investors, and we're pretty much the only game in town. And that's kind of sad to say, even although we're proud that we are here, is not enough of us. Then the next stage, Series A investors, there are a bunch. You run into them all the time. There's Kickstart, there's IdeaSpace, there's ICCP. There's a small venture capital industry that's happening, but that only goes up to Series A. When you're going to Series B, when you need to raise $10 million, $15 million, there's nobody. There's nobody in that space. So then investors fly in from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from Japan, from the US to look at those types of deals. And they're a little bit more hesitant because they don't have an office here, they don't have staff, they're not familiar with Philippine legal regulations. So there's a dearth at the seed early stage, and there's absolutely nobody in the Series B and beyond, B, C, D, pre-IPO, private equity, etc. So the on the funding side is really fragmented. It's really not a complete picture. What's interesting in the Philippines is there's a lot of government support, which is not, which I didn't see in the United States. There's not much, but it's all private sector based, and why? The incentive is there. There's huge money behind it. You invest in a Google, you're done for life, right? Here, you invest in a startup company, and you might get 2 times your money, and you're happy that you didn't lose your money. So it's a different perspective. What else?
So just building on what Victor set up. So to answer the question directly, who else can be playing, stepping up their game, right? So at the first level, the initial funding, our small business loans environment isn't the most friendly or appropriate because it doesn't allow for failure. Everything has to be super collateralized, which makes us very vulnerable to a lot of usury and people taking advantage of that. And so in terms of that, the actors that should be playing better will be the finance sector, the banking sector, and even the regulatory sector in terms of making it easy for individuals to generate loan income, interest income revenue. Then on the follow-on level, the Series B, as Victor was saying, in the Philippines, we do have a few CVCs that have come about. So CVCs means corporate venture capital businesses. So 917 Ventures, IdeaSpace, there's a lot of, the telcos have put up their CVCs, but there's still a lot of opportunities in other industries, insurance, banking. When you go to Thailand, for example, almost every major industry is represented with a CVC from all the leading players, which makes the industry much more robust. From the angel investing side, from a regulatory perspective, Malaysia and the UK, for example, have much better, much friendlier laws about encouraging individuals to make bets on at the angel round, because if it fails, then they get a tax break, right? So there's at least some of our capital has some payback. So it becomes easier to make the gamble. So banks, finance sector, corporate people that have a lot of money, companies that have a lot of resources, setting up corporate VCs, and then the regulators making things easier.
And on my end, I'll go in the other direction, which is really on the grassroots. The issue really speaks to no financial literacy in this country. People simply don't know what to do with money. And I've dealt with people both from, shall we say, from the education side. I've taught in some of the universities, both here and abroad. And the point is, from there, from graduation, no one teaches you about money, really. And then these people get into positions of authority regarding money that, again, they were never qualified to make. That's why the laws are not made, or the laws that are made really can't work in the real world, because they were designed by people who never actually was part of that world. So I think that's the root cause of the issues. A lot of entrepreneurs don't even think about dreaming big. I just, like as James said, I just want to be the best in Metro Manila or my hometown. I don't want to think big. Why? Because, well, I was never taught to think big. Okay, once you're given money, what do you do with it? And that creeps up Joseph has said, okay, banking system, we have one of the most archaic known requirements around. Everything has to be backed by real estate collateral. I have a business, I don't have real estate, so it's catch-22. You want 3 years of records before you give me a loan. But until I get a loan, I won't even reach 3 years. So why? Because again, those were made by people who actually don't understand what it takes to grow a business. They just said, okay, we'll do this. And so I think that's really the underlying cause for a lot of those, is that people really don't understand money. It's not part of the natural discussion. And we graduate, we work, we retire. We were never really taught to think about, okay, how do I actually grow this money in a sustainable way?
Okay, so I guess to summarize a bit, I would say everybody, all sectors can do more for our ecosystem, because our ecosystem is still very, very young. Government can improve the way that ease of doing business here is in the Philippines, right? For everybody, if it becomes easier to do business, to go through transactions, to get whatever permits you need, to file your taxes, then you'll see more businesses running more efficiently, which will help everybody. In the private sector, there needs to be more money going into riskier bets, and it doesn't even have to be big money. This can be very small micro investments that people with money are willing to make. If you notice, in the Philippines, our market is actually dominated by many large conglomerates, mainly family offices, and they're not really funding small businesses or startups, right? They're funding large ventures, very mature businesses. So if we were like other markets where there are a lot of these micro funds, micro investments being made into riskier bets, there would be more innovation, there would be more tech companies, there would be more startups. On the startup sector, one of the things kind of hindering investments being made is that the caliber of entrepreneurs is not as high as in other regions. Partly because of the lack of funding, so that people aren't able to make mistakes, gain experience that way, but also because people just aren't, developing their skills toward that direction. A lot of our education is directed toward young people becoming employees rather than entrepreneurs, but there are definitely moves to change that in college. There's been entrepreneurship introduced into technology courses. A lot of that is now happening, but there has to be more industry academic ties to kind of bring those students into practical places where that experience is actually put to use. You can't really have college professors teaching about business if they don't have any business experience. I don't want to criticize anybody, but that's just to be practical, right? And one of the other challenges as a nation is that our best talent is actually not staying here in the Philippines. Our best engineers, our best scientists, our best brains are going to other countries to build the stuff of other people.
So you stuck with us.
Well, it would just help if, as a nation, there was more incentive to be here in the Philippines. You can't really fault people going out if the opportunities are better outside of the country. But if we try to invest in the country more so that there are more opportunities for more talented individuals, yes, and that would create more opportunities for people to stay, which is what we need.
No, it's all well said. We could probably write an article for your paper.
Thank you.
But my view personally is that whatever helps the startups grow. So for us to succeed as investors, there needs to be startups succeeding and good quality startups. And a lot of obviously apart from the red tape and other issues, but some of the challenges are being addressed by the new Startup Innovation Act, particularly around what I understand will be equity-free grants. So that will be be a massive thing to give some more leeway to fail and to explore and to try and succeed. But unless someone wants to add, I'd like to thank you all for coming along. I'd like to thank Cubo for having us and remind you this is the first day of Philippine Startup Week. There's could be argued there's too much going on this week. There's so much going on. Make the most of it. This is the first time it's happened. There's a great coming together of all sorts of stakeholders, so it's a fantastic thing that there are a lot of overseas people in town for it, so it's a big draw. Thank you again. If you want to have a chat to anyone, please come up and say hello. and thank you.